Hey everyone, Jeff Douglas here with Appear Top Coder. I'm going to show some demo apps for the new nforce-tooling plugin with Node, of course. So we're going to run through a couple demo apps, one that just does things like get described, get objects, maybe inserts a new record and deletes it, and then we're going to actually deploy some Apex code. So we're going to run through those real quick. So first thing to do is create a folder, and then I'm going to make a package.json for our application. Let's go ahead and open this up real quick. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and copy this package stuff in here. And this just specifies for our Node app, you know, that we're using nforce, the tooling plugin, and then we're going to use promises also. So I'm going to do that real quick. Now let's go ahead and run npm install to install our dependencies. Alright, so we're all good there. Everything's installed. So now, of course, to connect to your nforce.com, or you're going to need your connection parameters such as your username and password, your client ID, and your client secret. So go ahead and grab those. I'm going to go ahead. I've got mine stored in another file, and I'm going to go ahead and add them to my environment variable by export sf user equals whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this and add those in real quick. Okay, so I just add those. So we'll do echo. So there's my user I'm using. We're all set there. Okay, so now we got our variables set up in our environment. So let's go ahead and create a new file. Let's call it tooling.g. Oops. And then we'll add that in here. All right, so now we've got our new file here. So first thing we need to do is we're going to add nforce. This maybe just copy and paste it. Let's do that here. Let's just copy and paste here. Save a little time. So we're going to go ahead and require nforce, and then we're going to set tooling with the nforce tooling package. We'll do that also, and then I'm going to add in my username and password from the environment. There's my username and password. And the big thing we do is going to create our connection to our org. You can see we create an object called org. We're going to call the create function for nforce. We're going to pass it the client ID and client secret, the callback. This is the callback URL you can use, and then we're going to do single mode, which actually just caches your connection inside nforce. You don't have to use it every time. And then we're going to tell it to use the tooling plugin. All right. So let's go ahead and do this real quick. We'll say so let me go ahead and grab some code here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go run the authenticate from nforce on that org. I'm going to pass a username and password, and then if it connects, I'm just going to say connected. If not, I'm going to have it run an error here. So let's go ahead and run this real quick. So we'll say this is tooling. Let's see if we get it to connect. Oh, there we go. Connected fine, no problem. All right, so let's go ahead and run our first one. So let's say we might want to do, let's do a describe real quick. So I'm gonna get some code in here for describe. So here's a function we're gonna add that runs describe for nforce, or for the tooling API. So we're gonna call it the tooling API, get describe. We're gonna tell it what class describe, and then on the callback, we're gonna just output what the Apex class looks like or an error. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. And we'll run that. Oh. I thought I just closed terminal. All right, so we'll do our describe our Apex class, and there we go. There's all of our fields. Comes back all the URLs for the objects, all that stuff right there for the Apex class, all the relationships, everything's on there. So there's a simple describe for you there. So now let's go ahead and run another one. Let's go ahead and grab and get all the objects that are in our org. So we'll add a new one here. Objects, we're going to go call objects on the plugin, and we're going to go ahead and just iterate through all the objects that were returned here. So got that, call that method now. Let's see, in the tooling. And there's our object. So we got name, static resources, metadata, all kinds of things that the tooling API has access to. And let's go ahead and get a specific object. Let's see what it looks like when we grab just, let's say, an Apex class. So we're going to get a certain object type. The type we're going to get is Apex class, and we're going to output that. So we're going to change this here. We're going to get this specific object. Now this, of course, doesn't have as much information as describe. It's kind of like a high-level describe with only certain things in there. If you want to get the full contents, of course, you're going to have it called the describe. And then last one, let's go ahead and query something. Let's go ahead and run a query from the tooling. So we'll do. Here's our query we're going to run. Select ID and name from the Apex class. Just get the first 10. So we're going to pass in this query, and then we're going to go ahead and iterate through the response that comes back. All right, let's run that. And there's all our Apex classes right there. So last one we're going to do is we're going to actually create a record, and then we're going to delete it. We're going to create a metadata container record. So here's the function for that, called create and delete. We're going to create a new metadata container. Just pass a certain name. You see this is the body here. So if this was something like an Apex class or Visualforce page, you know, the object would be would have many more parameters based on what you pass in on this object. And then we're going to go ahead and after we output it, we're going to go ahead and delete it just to clean up after ourselves too. Okay. All right, so let's run this. All right, so there you go. So you can see it created our new metadata container record, and then it went and deleted it successfully. So that's just a few little methods you can run, more or less the CRUD methods and the tooling methods for and the nforce-tooling plugin. So let's do something a little bit more exciting. Let's go ahead and create a small little script that you can use to deploy records, or I'm sorry, deploy Apex code. So let's do. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and show you here. I've got actually a class in here. Let's open this up. I've already got the Apex class in here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy most of this out of here real quick, because we don't need all of it. Get rid of all this. All right, so basically the same process here. And let's see. So this time we're going to do, it's going to be a little different. We're going to use promises. Now, if you haven't used promises, they're really fun, really easy to use when you're doing callbacks, multiple callbacks to Salesforce. So we're going to actually use those, and I'll show you how those work real quickly. We're also going to add a few things in here. I'm going to add in the ID of a class, an Apex class in Salesforce that I already have. I'm just going to update that class, and here's the new code I'm going to update that class with. Let's just do this here. Let's just do. All right. There's the class. Actually, let me show what the class looks like real quick here. So here is the class. Let me drag this over here. So here's the class we're going to update. You can see it has the same ID here. We're just going to update this tooling class here with just some. We're going to add the string equals s in here. All right, so we've got that in there. So let's go ahead and start pasting some code. I'm just going to paste this code in here and then talk about it, because it'll be much easier to look at. So what we're going to do is we're going to use promises. Like I said, if you haven't looked at promises, go ahead and look at those. It's under, you can query them and find node promises, and the package is Q. There's a lot of tutorials that explains promises. Really nice stuff. It's much better than using async. So what we're going to do is here, we're going to go ahead and first create a deployment container, and then we're going to add our updated code, and then we're going to deploy that code, and then we're going to get the status of our code. And if there's any failures along the way, we're going to output that failure here. Okay, so let's go ahead. Here's the code for creating the container. You can see that it creates a container, passes the name over here. So what this typically does, these methods that return a promises, it creates a deferred promise, and then it returns that right away. So that way it has something like a promise container to fill later on. So after it calls create container, it's gonna, if there's no error, it's gonna pass back, it's gonna resolve this deferred promise and pass back the container ID, or it's going to reject the promise and pass the error back. So that's kind of the same structure of every single one of these functions are going to do here. So we're going to create the container, and then we're going to pass back the container ID. And then we're going to update the code. We're going to pass in the updated code here. So here's our updated code. Of course, create the deferred container, or deferred promise, pass it back here. Then we're going to create an artifact. Now the artifact has a helper method on the nforce plugin called create deployment artifact, which basically sets up an object with all the fields you want, and then it passes in the new code and the Apex class that we're updating. It hides a lot of that implementation for you. And then we're going to add the artifact container, add the artifact to the container. We're going to pass the container ID, which was passed into this met function, and then pass in the artifact. And then if that was successful, we're going to go ahead and pass the container ID back. If not, we're going to pass an error back. Of course, both those to the promises. And then we're going to deploy. So the deploy function looks like this right here. Oops, looks like this right here. So here's the deferred promise again. We pass that back. And then we're going to go ahead and grab the metadata container. Basically use that, set that as a variable so we can use it on the cleanup in the next function. We're going to call deploy container. We're going to say check only equals false. That way it actually deploys it. By default, the tooling plugin does not actually deploy it, only runs it. And actually, it compiles it, but doesn't deploy it. Sorry. And then we're going to go ahead, of course, if it successfully deploys, we're going to pass the async container ID that was created for this deployment back, so that way we can check the status in the next method. And if it is an error, of course, we're going to reject that promise. And the last one is the get deploy status. Now what this does is it actually checks the deployment status of the container, and if the container status that comes back is queued, it's going to call this method again recursively with the container, the async container ID. If it's not queued, it's going to be one of these states over here, and it's going to print out certain things such as it's completed, then we're done. If it fails, it's going to pass back the compile errors. If it's error, it's going to pass back some different errors on deployment. And then if it's not any of those, it's going to pass back another status. And then at the end, we're going to actually delete this metadata container that we created, so that way we clean up after ourselves. Okay? So let's go ahead and go back up here. You can kind of see this. So again, we're going to create our container with this name. We're going to add the updated code. We're going to deploy it, and then we're going to check the deployment status continually until it's completed. All right, so that should work. Let's run this real quick here. Oh, we don't want that. Let's see what we get here. All right, so there we go. So you can see we started the deployment process. We're deploying our code. We're checking the status of code. The status is currently queued, so we're going to check it again. So here we go. So now you can see the code successfully deployed. Let's see if I actually refresh this page here, we should see the new. There we go. So there's our new code here. So that's how easy it is to actually deploy new code with the nforce-tooling plugin. So I hope you guys can think of some great ideas for this. I've got some stuff I'm working with, and it should be awesome. If you have any ideas or issues, go ahead and put them on the GitHub repo, and we'll look at them. Thanks a lot.